Randall Dupree here with Forge Point LLC, and today I wanted to talk to you all about why transformations fail. So, I've spent over 25 years in manufacturing, mostly working in aerospace and defense, and I've been part of many transformations and I've led several of them myself. Some of these transformations focus on culture and engagement, deploying new values and behaviors for very large organizations. Other transformations were much smaller and focused on looking at the way work was done in shops and certain departments and just totally rehauling factories, overhauling them, and just creating an environment for continuous improvement to flourish, removing waste, applying lean and continuous improvement and kaizen principles. But when I take a look at all of the years of transformation work that I've done, and I've looked at where we were most successful and where we had the most issues, it usually came down to leadership. And as John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls on leadership. You see, when it comes to transformation, most organizations don't struggle because they lack tools or methods. There's no shortage of resources, books, consultants, frameworks, and experts of every kind. Most organizations struggle because they can't earn real employee buy in or sustain credibility. They struggle because leadership behavior doesn't always support the improvement. You see, lean and continuous improvement work, but they only work when leaders create the conditions for them to work. So, at its core, it's a culture issue. And you can't have a lasting transformation without creating a culture of continuous improvement. And culture is downstream of leadership. A few years ago, I worked with a company that brought in Shingazitsu, a Japanese consulting firm, and they were blunt and they told us that we were not ready for transformation. And their reason had nothing to do with the tools. Leadership hadn't established the right culture. Leaders weren't holding people accountable to standard work, something very basic. Leaders themselves weren't following leader standard work. Leaders weren't leading the improvements. They were delegating quite a bit. And leaders weren't modeling the behaviors they expected from others. So they lacked credibility. Look, over 2 decades of leading lean projects and observing leaders, I've started to study John Maxwell and his leadership principles. And John Maxwell has reinforced a simple but uncomfortable truth, and that's culture follows leadership behavior. What leaders pay attention to, they reinforce. And what they reinforce and what they tolerate, that becomes the way things are done. And when it comes to continuous improvement, it's not primarily an operational challenge. It is usually a leadership one, which is why I'm very passionate about leadership and why I've become a Maxwell Leadership Certified team member, because there is a natural synergy between continuous improvement and lean and leadership. They work together hand in hand. So I've put together a playbook and it's called Why Transformation Fails. And it's not a checklist. It is actually a playbook because it's meant for leaders to contemplate the different leadership principles that will enable transformation. And it's all based on Maxwell's content. And it begins with awareness and belief because people must first see reality clearly and trust leadership intent before they will engage. And then it moves to example and capacity because leaders must model the behavior and grow people's ability to think, learn, and solve problems. From there, it shifts to ownership and safety, creating conditions where people have the authority to act and the psychological safety to learn. And then once those foundations are in place, leaders build momentum and alignment, reinforcing improvement through small wins and through systems that reward the right behaviors. Finally, it ends with consistency and multiplication because improvement only becomes culture when leadership behavior is repeated daily and delivered and developed in others so it outlives any one person. So if you are a fan of John Maxwell or if you've read several of his books like I have, you've probably picked up on some of those leadership principles in that last paragraph that I just read off to you all. So those principles for leaders to focus on for transformation to really stick are awareness, belief, example, capacity, ownership, and then there's safety, momentum, alignment, consistency, and multiplication. In my opinion, and this is based on over 25 years of leading transformations, in my opinion, if you focus on those 10 things as a leader, of all the numerous leadership capabilities and principles to focus on, those are the 10, in my estimation, that are most going to have an impact on a transformation, whether you are leading a lean transformation or a culture transformation. Ultimately, both start with leadership.